we could have a roll call, even though all 5 of us are here.
Councilmember Moore?
Here.
Councilmember Harvey?
Here.
Mayor Delasso?
Here, that was for effect.
Okay.
Vice Mayor Skillman?
Here.
Councilmember Lambert?
You know it is live.
Yes, indeed. All right, and I'd like to go ahead and open this up to public comment, and seeing no one with public comment, we will close. We can reopen that at several times in the meeting should it be necessary. And we will go right into our budget studies session for enterprise and other funds for fiscal year 1920. No, 19-20. We keep saying 1920. It sounds really weird.
Sounds like we're dealing with a very old budget.
Yeah, why bother?
It's an old budget.
Really?
Yeah, 101 years ago. So, thank you, Mayor, members of the council. This is enterprise, so I know you all know what that means, but for anyone that doesn't, that's the water and sewer systems, which are operated as a business, in other words, not subsidized by the general fund. So they have to pay with rate revenue for their for all their operations and capital needs. And so this is talking about both of those enterprises, which consist of 4 funds, and also the capital projects related to them that are proposed for fiscal year 1920. And with that, I'll let Angela start the presentation.
If I could just add one more note that maybe I should have done at the beginning, is that we are filming, and so we are live on the web this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, council members and mayor. So I'd like to start off the schedule with how we're scheduling out the budget sessions, just kind of give a summary. So we've already covered the general funds, the special revenue funds, capital projects, and internal service funds. After our strategic planning session we held on March 27th. Then right now we're having our enterprise funds, and as Damian said, we're just covering the water funds, sewer funds, and the capital projects within each of those. And we will continue the budget studies with the final full budget packet submission to be scheduled to be done on May 31st and budget adoption on June 11th. So out of our strategic planning session from council, we were drive these goals or objectives which follow the same objectives we have for all of our funds, which is the community, infrastructure, and economic development. For the enterprise funds, we really still have those same goals of cultivating effective citywide communication, improving the existing infrastructure, and continuing economic development, as well as which includes funding the infrastructure, meeting the service needs, as well as meeting the new services and jobs for Cotati. So the enterprise funds are much different than our general funds, where these are ones that are operating much like a business. They have to make enough money to support their own services. They cannot be funded by general fund transfers or other special revenue funds transfers. It has to be self-sustaining as an individual standalone entity. So that is our general interpretation of what our enterprise funds are. And for us, these are our water and sewer. The overall budget highlights are that we are going to continue to maintain the 33% operating reserve for the operating funds for water and sewer. That we are going to continue to change our rates as per our rate study. So we've adopted that within our budget. These rates are effective as of June 15th, and those bills then come out 2 months subsequent to that point in time. The connection fees are only based on the Kessing Ranch development. We're going to continue to focus on the infrastructure improvements and the preservation in a strategic manner. And we're going to have slight revisions to the estimates on funding for internal service funds, so that's why they were also included in the packet, since we did have some revisions to those. So first of all, we're going to hit our water fund. So the main component to the water fund, since this is a business, is the revenue calculation. And the calculation of revenue is based on the usage and a base charge that go out to our customers. The base charge is set based on the needs for the infrastructure and to maintain those fixed costs for operations. whereas the rate is based on usage, and this is based on our actual usage for water that flows through the meter, and it's charged at 1,000-gallon level. There's actually a really great resource on the City of Cotati website under Resident Services, Water and Sewer Rates, which can show you exactly how your bill is calculated and give you examples on how it plays out between the water and sewer and what rates are applied to what based on the type of services you have. So our budget assumptions, going a little bit deeper into the water funds, as you'll see on packet page 6, that the water rates are determined by the cost to maintain the infrastructure, and we are going to have a new financial review of the water rates, which includes a component for the ADVU evaluations in fiscal year 1920. So that's something we're looking for in the rate study for next year. And the capital projects improvements for next year are planned to be the Cypress tank and main replacement design phase, the SCADA, and the chlorination equipment replacement. These are in further detail on packet page 10 and 19. We also have the assumption for fiscal year 18-19 that we've completed the St. Joseph's water main replacement. So this graph just really depicts the revenue streams historically and going on to the next budget year compared to our expenditures. The changes in operating expenditures for fiscal year 1920 are the personnel services. So because we are again budgeting at full employment, so it has those staffing changes as well as the payment to the compensated absences funds. We have an increase in the allocated contract services, and that's due to, again, we're doing this more and more, and so we're identifying more contract services that need to be allocated, as well as there was a very small change in the FTE allocation, so just a small incremental. We have a new professional services contract for that financial rate plan, as well as increased water conservation programs for the next fiscal year. This graph depicts the capital expenditures we have historical, and it shows that the key to improvements in the Vital Water program are going to continue, and we're going to start that off with the design of that Cypress tank starting in 1920. And you can see in, was that 15, 16? That was the meter replacement in 15, 16. The last slide for our water operations, and this is just taking it back to that rate study that sets everything forward, and we make sure that our rate study really is in line with how we're budgeting, that our budget makes sense, and that the rate study still also makes sense. And you'll see that in fiscal year 1920, per the rate study, I should put a bullet there, but it shows that we actually dip into a negative operating reserve, whereas in our budget, we've actually held that off and pushed it back. We have an operating reserve. We're not we're not meeting it. And so we'll continue to evaluate this on a going forward basis to make sure if there's other expenditures that can be reduced or moved back in order to make sure that we're meeting the operating reserve.
And so that dashed line is the 33% operating reserve. And in the fund, the rate study just showed the fund balance briefly. This is the adopted rate study. It shows it briefly dipping below that, and at least as of now, it looks like we're staying above it, so that's good.
So I think at this point in time, I don't know if we wanted to break to ask questions about the water fund before we go into the sewer fund.
Council members, any questions regarding water at this point? I'm sorry, we have no questions at this point in time.
Okay, we'll push forward into the sewer funds. So the sewer funds, I just wanted to go over a little bit more about how the sewer charges are calculated, because again, it's a big driver of our revenue. And it's a little bit different because it's not based on actual usage. We have to use a historical average in order to get the amount that we estimate is going into the sewer system. And that is how that is built out. So this really details out how that historical average is calculated and applied to bills, and how it is different for new customers versus existing customers. New customers, we don't know what their water usage and thus their sewer usage is. And so we have an average that we estimate based on the individuals living in the household, and that gets applied to them until we can calculate an actual average usage for sewer. Yes?
Does anybody meter in that direction? Does everybody estimate? I was just curious that,
Yes, it's impractical to meter a sewage line because it would get gooked up and everything, and we'd be constantly going out there to clear them up. So this is a common practice.
thank you.
And I think this was touched on, but the average is the winter average, right? So not a summer average when you're using irrigation water. They average over the winter when presumably all your irrigation's turned off. And so they get hopefully a good representation of your inside water use that would then be sewage discharge without actually metering the sewage. As Craig said, it's hard to get the toilet paper out of the meter.
Well, that's why I asked, because oftentimes we get questions from people and they say, well, I don't use that much. I don't, and it's sort of like, well, I didn't know if there was anybody that did it, because I had never heard that anyone had, but I just, it's good to know that people just don't do that. It's not
Yeah,
a
I've
practice.
never heard of it either.
No.
And just to touch on it, that is something that if they do call us, we will look at their average to see if maybe they have pulled down their water usage, and we can re-average them on an ongoing basis. And then we will also continue to do that as a part of our annual re-averaging, which we're doing right now. But they can call in and say, hey, I have used less water. Can you re-average my sewer? So a sewer funds overview, again, similar to the water, we have our sewer rates that are based on our rate study we just adopted, and those will go into place on our June 15th. The proposed capital project improvements are the manhole lateral repair and improvements, as well as the SCADA projects. The big assumption is that 18-19 we've completed the P1 pipeline, thus that will initiate the interfund loans. Subsequent to publication of this packet, we actually got some guidance on these interfund loans between the sewer funds. So there might be additional changes to additional line items within the budget, but overall, and the combined statement on packet page 15, there shouldn't be any change in the consolidated balances, but it could lead to minor changes in 1920 that will be included in the final budget. For the sewer funds, again, with the revenues are exceeding expenditures, we're right on the cusp here at 18-19 due to additional expenses to P1 and everything. The big changes in operating expenditures for 2019 and 20 are the personnel services, the increased allocated contract services, the increase to sewer treatment costs, the contract services we're going to be initiating for the infrastructure mapping, as well as the expenses to the vehicle replacement and maintenance internal service fund. Here's a chart that shows our capital expenditures over the years. P1 in 18-19, which was a strategic investment to continue to allow our infrastructure to grow with the city, as well as continue to efficiently serve our existing population. So we're going to continue to focus these improvements with the manhole lateral repair system so that we can deter that storm water from penetrating into the wastewater system. So So this, this is again from our sewer rate study that we just completed, and it's the latest model. So we, again, use this to verify our revenues and expenditures are really in line with our budget and our rate study. And if you see on packet page 13, comparing 1920, the year over year, to the rate study, believe that we're really in line with what the fund balance is and meeting and exceeding that required operating reserve. So I want to point out there. So in conclusion, we have a balanced budget that we are providing to you, and we'll continue to closely monitor these funds to ensure that we're staying on track and to stabilize the growth of these funds going forward. We're going to continue to operate our reserve requirements to meet both for the water and the sewer funds, and we'll come back to you with any updates and significant changes for these funds for the final budget.
And I'll just add, just to conclude, that in the sewer funds, so 18-19 was really the year of getting this major capital project done that was needed to deal with some existing sewer flow deficiencies, and also allow pretty much the entire city east of the 101 to continue to, and major parts of west of 101 to continue to develop in accordance with the general plan and the downtown specific plan and so forth. So that was the I'd say the theme of 18-19 and 19-20. It's as Angela said, it's really focusing on our existing infrastructure, and between our sewer flow meters, which give us really good information on where, especially during wet weather, where we're seeing inflow and infiltration, as well as the hydraulic modeling that's based on the sewer flow data, gives us really pretty good insight on which zones of the sewer system are the leakiest, so to speak, with regard to rainwater and groundwater. So, so that's really what we're going after, or we're proposing to go after in 19-20, is to really try to tighten up any areas that we're seeing unusually higher levels of rainwater or groundwater coming into the sewer system, because for obvious reasons we don't want to be pumping and then paying for treatment of rainwater. It's expensive. So so that's really the focus this year. And one other thing I'll add is the thing that Angela talked about, that it doesn't affect the combined balance sheet that you see in the packets for sewer, and that's 13, is it? Packet page 13. That's the combined 404, 405 fund page. That doesn't change, but 404 and 405, when we come back with a final budget for consideration, the one thing that we're going to be adjusting is the interfund loan piece between sewer capital and sewer operating. After going back and forth with Robin, with Myers Nave, we asked them some questions about if that's a requirement or not to do a loan between the two, or if they can just transfer money as needed for capital projects that are sewer projects. And after the packet was published, the answer was, well, you don't need to do that. You can just transfer funds between those two sewer funds. There's no reason to set up an interfund loan for that piece of it. The interfund loan for inclusionary housing would still be there. So anyway, it doesn't affect the overall net of the two funds combined, but the individual funds, when you look at them, will be a little different in what we're going to bring forward for a proposed final budget later.
Thank you. I do have a question on packet page 17. So I'm looking at the sewer capital, and under operating revenues, if I got my line straight, the second line of sewer connection fees, there's this huge jump. And is that based on the two developments, or is there actually some anticipation of business connection fees? It seems, I mean, that's a very large number compared to it over the last several years.
So yeah, so in some years past, we would budget on projects that have been approved or were almost approved, And we thought, well, there's a likelihood that some fraction of them would actually pull building permits and pay the connection fees. And inevitably, it always seems to be a relatively inaccurate estimate based on when we see the end of the year, where we actually land with connection fees. So, so this year in this budget philosophy, we really decided that, you know what, we're not going to, any connection fees, unless it's virtually guaranteed to be received, we're not going to even speculate whether or not we're going to get it or not. And if we do actually end up getting it, then that's good for us, right? But we wouldn't count on that revenue. And so it's a long way of answering the question, which is, the reason why it's in there is because this is for Kessing Ranch, and they are doing the skip bond program, and so the bonds are virtually guaranteed. I mean, they're in the process of getting ready to be issued, and so when those bonds get issued, the money becomes immediately available to the city for all the units on the development.
I see, and that's what I was going to ask, because that number is so large, it seems like a full build-out, and we know that there's a different kind of philosophy that'll take place there, but because they're taking the bonds out, that money becomes available, so it goes into our budget.
Right.
I got it.
Right. As opposed to a normal development process where it's like unit by unit by
Right.
unit. So it takes a while. This is a little different with the skip process.
Okay, all right, well, thank you. Are there other questions for, wait, you're pointing it. We'll go with Councilmember Harvey.
I'll make this a quick.
Okay, we'll go with Councilmember Landman.
I wanted to ask, you mentioned briefly 1920 looking at working on reducing rainwater intrusion through some of the older manhole covers, and rightfully so, because of that decreases capacity and there's increased cost because then we're paying for that to be treated. I was curious, do we have an idea what those reductions when that process is complete look like? How large a number is it? I mean, it makes sense to take care of either way, but I was just curious how much gets lost in this, how much extra we pay because of this sort of thing.
It's not uncommon for sewer flows to peak during stormwater events by a factor of 5, 6, 7 times.
Okay.
And so if you can get those down to a peaking factor of 3 or 4, it still sounds like a lot, but it's a dramatic reduction. And of course, the storm flows only happen, you know, for a period, attenuated period after the storm, so for a few days. But there's 2 types. There's the infiltration during a storm. I mean, the inflow during a storm. Then there's this infiltration from groundwater. That's like longer periods of time over the year.
Kind of a baseline thing.
So the volume of that is much more significant. And so we're going after both of those types of the I&I, the inflow and the infiltration.
So it sounds like over time, over years, that actually adds up to a relatively significant expense.
It does. It's the most cost-effective way to gain capacity in your sewer collection system.
Yeah, I know when we first got involved in this years ago, I remember we first started learning about water and learning what typical losses are in water systems. And I think most everybody's tried to move away from that now. So interesting, and thank you for that answer. That's good to know.
All right, so we'll bounce around. We'll go to Councilmember Harvey.
As you mentioned, our last capital improvement plan was in 2011. I was curious as to when we would be doing another one. I know on a lot of the plans we do like a 5-year period, and we're now in 1920, so that was my question.
Yeah, that was the last master plan that was done for the water system and the sewer system. And then we use that, so the master plan goes out 10 years or maybe more. It shows, you know, future infrastructure based on the modeling and the general plan growth that's expected. And then the actual capital program is derived from that, you know, like a 5-year window typically, right? So that that program, that's actually, as you're alluding to, is due to be updated. And we're going to be bringing at least large parts of it this summer to be basically goes back through Planning Commission for finding of consistency with the general plan and then to the council.
Great.
So it's coming back.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Councilmember Moore, any questions or comments? All right, Vice Mayor Skillman?
No, thank you.
All right, I'll go ahead and open this up for public comment. If anybody has any comments on the sewer and water capital funds, Seeing no one, I will close the public comment and bring it back to staff. Any reports to conclude, or are we there?
No, the only other thing was based on your question about the connection fees. I did also want to point out in the water capital fund 402, so packet page 10, that's the connection fees there as well. The balance about 6 lines down, the connection fees there. You'll see that that's that 100% Kessing Ranch based on that bond.
Great, thank you.
That's it. Thank you.
Okay. Just any further direction from council for staff on this?
Looks good.
Great. Thank you. Since last week at our meeting, we looked at the general fund, which was certainly more complex and detailed than the sewer and water and capital fund here. I think if we have nothing else to report out, are we actually going to adjourn?
Well, yeah, just
You're
actually one more-
leaning towards your microphone.
One more
so-
thing.
Okay, all right.
One more thing.
Yeah, because we can't leave yet.
Of course not, sorry.
Just one more thing I thought about with the capital program. The focus this summer, by the way, just to be more clear, is on the streets. You already saw the draft 5-year CIP. So it's bringing that back, as well as the park plan. That's going to be the focus. The water and sewer is under a current rate. So the rate study that was adopted a couple of years ago, it has the 5-year CIP for the water and sewer systems kind of baked into that. But we're looking at the parks and streets specifically this summer, just to get that updated, which needs to be refreshed. And the park plan, as the elusive park plan that I've been talking about forever, that you probably doubt even exists at this point, but it is coming forward. So that's going to be the focus of it, to get those things. That's it. Thanks.
All right, thank you very much. Seeing that we are complete with our agenda, we will adjourn at 6:58. Thank you.